Hello, I can see you here.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
Great. So actually, if you're ready to start, let's start.
Yeah, I'll share screens and maybe do a very quick setup so that the deck is looking good. So 3 seconds for that.
Yeah, we need presentation mode.
Yeah,
I see some.
Yeah.
I see that something is closing part of the presentation. Just some gray blocks. If you can somehow fix it.
Okay.
It's still there.
I'm sharing the whole screen. So, any change?
Nope.
Do you see the deck? Do you see the slide?
I see the deck, but I also see some gray blocks. Now one is disappeared and the other is still there. So okay, I'm not sure if it will.
That better now?
Yeah. Now it's good.
Perfect.
So let's start.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this short talk session on the hidden waste in the localization end-to-end. So one of the topics today for the Lock from Home are the different types and approaches to the localization process. So we talk about automated or manual or continuous localization, and we talk about continuous improvement as well. But do we really see what drives the performance of our bigger process? Or are we caught up in what technologies give us and offer us, things like standard reports, or are we caught up in the so-called best practices and sometimes even random data? So the purpose. Okay, moving on. So the purpose of this session is to share a few examples of what we call waste, and specifically some hidden waste in the localization end-to-end. And it's waste we often don't care about simply because we focus on other things like delivering or like automating as much as possible, sometimes even including the waste. So our minds are often operating in something you could call economies of scale. So this is in localization specifically. This is, for example, the word rate and the leverage models, including machine translation, machine learning, or scaling in terms of having deadlines and SLAs and changing conditions for that, or even the whole model, the strategic outsourcing model that our clients and buyers use to basically create a global market for themselves. So this is all great, but what we've been doing over the last few years is me and some teams I've worked with have looked at over 70 distinct whole localization processes with LSPs and with enterprises, and we've identified waste that relates to how the work itself moves or cycles from one end to the other end. And this creates a very different perspective. So you could call this perspective economies of flow. And based on what we find, we know that we forget about it. And it's partly because our industry is highly technology driven, sometimes to the extent that a process can't even be fully optimized because it's overwhelmed by technologies. So what are we finding? Before showing you the examples, let's take a moment to define what value is. Okay. So what does it mean when there's an end-to-end? You have a customer and you have demand, and specifically looking at different types of demand is very useful when identifying value. Then what you have is the ends. one end and another end, and then you've got the delivery. So whatever is between the two ends is the creation of value, or should be. Customers frequently don't care too much about the different things that happen inside it, as long as they receive the value. And so when you look inside those different steps on high level, this is really just a simple model, you see that some of them in the work actually create value for the customer, and some of them just don't. So there are different types of waste. Some of it is necessary because we just can't move the thing without doing something that doesn't create a value. Let's not go into that, but there is waste that is unnecessary. And there is also something you call failure demand, which is basically when waste is created and something is not done right for the customer, another cloud of activities kind of explodes, and you're trying to catch everything, and more people get involved and things like that. So there is also growth of unnecessary waste. So this is a very simple end-to-end where a client and some kind of service provider is involved. And we have also a bigger end-to-end in mind, where there are more entities that get distinguished in the loop. So you can see more ends. And one example of that could be a customer, a client with, I don't know, a marketing function, or the whole organization's different functions that request globalization work to be done. There are different types of demand. There are different entities involved, like their own globalization services department, then it goes out to LSPs, then to suppliers and subcontractors, then back to LSPs, and then to globalization services for finalization, and is delivered. So clearly, the bigger the end-to-end is, there are more opportunities to identify and remove hidden wastes, because between the different borders in the end-to-end, there frequently exist different ecosystems, and you could sometimes even see them as walls. And it's frustrating many times on the LSP side, on supplier side. So we're not always ready, and it's not always possible to work on the bigger end-to-end, but the purpose of this session also is to remind us of this, because the potential for performance improvement is just massive. So let's look at the example. I'm using an anonymized examples from one end-to-end redesign, where a client and an LSP and also suppliers were involved. Okay, so a few facts, a few really anecdotal facts. The yearly lock revenue for that from that client was about $2 million US per year. They were evaluated and seen as a very mature business when it comes to enabling localization, if you like. They had about 50 different products and up to 50 languages. Okay, so the approach taken there was really a single loop of system redesign and testing the new kind of design prototype, and 2 improvement facilitators were involved who've been experts on this type of work. One of them was me, and the on-site work took about 2 months. Okay, so the examples are kind of specific, and their purpose of this session is draw your attention to the types of data that drove the big improvements. So we've analyzed the end-to-end, we've kind of created an understanding what drives the performance, and then created a vision of the reinvented and changed system, mostly on the LSP side, but being allowed to look in the kitchen of the end client. And we started doing the work and completed. I'll show you the outcomes in a second. So let's go into the examples. First example is designing by demand and understanding by demand types and demand frequencies. So here is a very simple representation of a very high-level distinction of the types of demand. That understanding was important to see what prevails, and this is basically counting individual jobs, yeah, and it's, I think, over a year worth of data, so it just shows percentages, but this gave an initial clarity about what impact different types of demand represent when you look at the whole thing, and it's from client or let's say buyer perspective. Okay, so you can see several types, like faster delivery and then regular delivery, and then distinguishing if it's done with review or without review, and then there's a weird category of deliver it as soon as you can. Okay, moving on, let's move to seeing an example of plotting the dots. So this is a chart, and we don't need to understand the detail of it, but basically looking at the demand in ways that are unaggregated and creating these daily dots. And this is using process control charts. So you see some kind of statistically determined upper and lower limits of the whole system, which creates a kind of balance. And it's a very simple statistical approach. There's no need to go into big methodologies like Six Sigma and what have you. But by looking at this type of data, you will always see impacts on the system. And we'll see that in a minute. So by drilling down into this basic set of data, we found that from the end-to-end perspective, 60% of the demand was delivered late, which is a slightly different view of the task, of course. But that was one finding. Second finding was that in spite of all the systems in the end-to-end were integrated, so it's client, LSP, supplier, the client and LSP were living in quite different realities when it comes to on-time delivery. Yeah? So these needed to be straightened because each entity had a slightly different understanding of what's on time, and they used different sets of data for that, even though the systems were fully connected. Next two big findings of this type of approach were surprising. Everybody was surprised. 80% of the whole demand going through that system, when it was tracked using the prototype, actually stopped somewhere in the process or was delayed. And 12% of that demand was completely canceled at some point during the process. Again, it was kind of known that some things don't go through and go in all sorts of different directions and are handled in different ways, but nobody knew exactly which and how much and what are the causes for this an additional thing. So looking at demand with unaggregated data in this type of way creates clarity that many clients and LSPs don't have, and cleaning this makes a very big impact on performance. Here's a few more examples of the ways when you look at the demand in these ways, which actually does not look at technology much or at all, but it looks at, well, this one shows that 27% of the demand is released or triggered by the client on Mondays, yeah? So it's looking at the bulk of demand and the day of the week and applying very simple view. So this is obviously aggregated, but it shows where most demand is coming in on which weekday. Combined with the time of day, again, from customer perspective, when that demand is accepted or acted on by the service provider, again, created a view that was very interesting because the global model and the number of languages required 4 different coordinators around the globe to be able to handle the demand for the different languages. So it could be delivered in 24 hours or 48 hours, which were the 2 SLAs or 2 types of deadline. So when we looked at this in more detail, we found that by simply changing the way we approach the demand from the client, we could save a lot of resource capacity, and we could release that resource capacity to be doing something else. And this is in fact what happened. So this example is the outcome of it. You can see 4 different shades of purple, which represents 4 different resources and their time zones and their work and handling of demand. And a lot of it was really exchanging the demand with other resources and basically doing unnecessary handling. Whereas the second chart shows the optimized loop 1, and it was further optimized later, but this shows the first optimization, where you can see the bulk of demand, which is basically the blue bars, the largest amount of demand at a specific hour of the day, is processed progressively by one resource, and then there's another resource available, and a third one as well here, but they in fact were not needed because it was standardized. And you can see that fewer resources are required to cover for the demand that needs to be turned around very fast. So this was one of the big outcomes of the work, just by looking at data in ways that the client or LSP didn't look at before. Okay, moving on quickly. I'm probably flying you through this because of the fact that we have only 20 minutes. So next example, and it's part of, this one is part of the same story. This is, again, statistical chart. So this is moving range chart, and let's not, again, go into the detail of it. Moving range measures how variation changes over time. So it measures the distance between the consecutive points. And it basically is a picture of variation. So this one is the turnaround time, and it's average turnaround time on a daily basis by the date of completion. Yeah. So you can also see that it spans quite a reasonable amount of time, and that there are actually changes in the system. So we could find distinct changes in this data and also identified why. And we use this type of chart to actually measure the impact of the change of SLAs, because this is the next example. And the example is, in fact, the deadlines were causing work to be delivered late. It's strange as it sounds, but when the 48, 24-hour SLA was in place, when we drilled down into the data, we found that most of the work for all the different languages was started very, very close to the deadline, while it could be started much earlier. So the deadline itself, and the fact that the chunks of work, the tasks and jobs were really small and fast turnaround jobs, deadline caused accumulation of delivery work very close to the deadline, causing a lot of deadlines to slip, time zone causing some deadlines to be, of course, bigger problems. And then when it was just slipped, nobody cared about it. So the key findings were, let's change something about it. And what we changed was, instead of deadlines, start measuring with the subcontractor suppliers the moment the work is started. This means that when accepting the job, it doesn't mean I accept the job and then wait and then do it at some point, but we change the perception of accepting the job to accepting the job means you actually start on the job. And it shifted the whole, let's say, view of the work and flow to, whenever I accept a job, I actually am starting on it. And by this, we were able to, or the suppliers were actually able to reduce the variation. So this type of chart actually, after a while of doing this, showed a much more control over variation. So basically the upper and lower control lines that you see in this chart, UCL, LCL, became narrower. There was far less variation happening, and the turnaround times actually improved. So Okay, so basically variation caused by the deadline-driven approach was reduced and the overall performance of the whole process improved. So that's another example. And then I've got an example of the approach to the process waste. So this little comic actually illustrates what frequently is happening with good intentions, great capabilities, and very smart people implementing a great solution, but sometimes it's automating waste because the bigger picture view is either not done or or neglected. So this example is very simple. Again, it's just an illustration from the work, and what you see here is not a process because there's a difference between flow and process. Process means something that should be happening and it's usually well documented, and this is a picture of what actually is happening with key people involved. So you can see some steps in yellow, you can see some types of demand at the start, you can see some red bits, which is basically types of data, and the reds are key issues. And the steps with red print actually represent waste steps, and the yellow steps with green print actually are the value creation steps. So there was a lot of waste and failure demand in the flow, and it caused delays and errors. And as you see at the end, the very end part, which actually includes billing, was complicated and time consuming, and there were many redundant reports and you know, lots of problems. So we have reduced the unnecessary waste, and although you don't see too many boxes disappearing in the flow because a lot of the waste is still there, it was reduced, and a lot of the issues were not fixed but were actually eliminated by the fact that some of the steps changed. So the focus was to eliminate issues in the flow. The outcomes were more controlled system, got rid of tracking sheets, and improved the whole PO system in the whole end-to-end. Now, this combined with the data I showed you about demand created an impact of 50% internal cost savings. The ambition has been to create a double-digit internal cost saving in terms of percentage. And these initiatives do always, in the work I've done, create double-digit internal cost savings for the LSP. And for the end client, usually these are less tangible, but frequently result in additional demand starting to flow towards the LSP, which was the case of this story. In numbers, this was $600,000 US in year one for just completing the loop one of the redesign. So that's just to give you some data. And I'm conscious of time.
Roman, I'm sorry for interrupting. I know that you have a few slides left and we have only 4 minutes.
4 minutes.
A couple of questions. So maybe, yeah, if you can wrap up somehow, like the pointing on the main things that left in the presentation, so we can take those 2 questions.
Okay. So basically, this is a summary of the principles I've been going through, just in a summary, and creating the different perspective, different thinking by using economies of flow. And these will be available for you to read. And my challenge is, do you know what the impact is when the process waste is removed in your own localization ecosystem? The client feedback from this story has been surprise, and I'm quoting now, why aren't we doing this? Because we were thinking we already are agile and very well integrated. And the discovery moment was amazing. So that's really it. And the hidden waste, in our experience, creates a radically better performance combined with the standard approaches to improvement.
Okay, great. Okay, can you please stop sharing so people can see us on the screen, not the presentation? And then we'll move to the questions. Okay, we have a couple of questions here. The first one from Mario. Roman, from the LSP viewpoint, the translator accepting the job but not starting it, would that mean he's causing waste? From the translator's viewpoint, he's exercising his or her own time management, prioritizing tasks. Do you see that this perceived waste as added pressure to rush the task?
Right. Understand and agree, because from the translator perspective, this indeed is a lot of management that needs to happen. And when you do have a lot of small tasks during your day, it's about prioritizing. So this was perceived as waste from the perspective of the process, but we provided training to the translators and created a shared understanding in terms of, if you create a cadence of looking at the demand at a regular time, will it improve things for you? And they said yes. So the client actually standardized the moments when the demand was coming out. And for the translator, it meant more predictability. So they could execute the kind of regular start of work easier, and we use their feedback. But I see your point, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. And one more question from Martin. What would you recommend to a small-scale localization operation when it comes to identifying the hidden waste in the process?
Right. So when your end-to-end is relatively small, I would suggest starting with looking at the data and finding what's relevant and offering this data as a view to your client. Yeah. So if you're somewhere in the value chain and you see there's no much space to improve things because you can't influence the outside, starting to collect this type of data and showing them to the client. And if you're kind of happy to invest a little bit of data and resource into doing this, then that initiative, in our experience, frequently is seen as, okay, maybe we won't play with you actively, but we will allow you to see our data in more detail, and we will enable you to create improvements. And then the conversation can start. So that's what I'd recommend, start the conversation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, there's just one more appeared. Let's take this one. Considering that the translators are located in different time zones, do you think follow the sun model is really efficient, or it is also creating some new waste?
Right. Yeah, very good question. So follow the sun is our reality. And what I mean by that, the Earth is revolving, so we will always have to work with time zones. And translators are usually spread all over the globe. So follow the sun model is great when it's applied in ways that actually don't waste resources on either side. So when there's opportunity to create that view and standardize or reduce variation of when the demand is coming on, there is always space to optimize it. And then the follow the sun model actually can be much more effective. So I think that example I showed documents that, follow the sun is efficient as long as it uses the minimum resources needed to cover the globe.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Let's steal some time from the break because we have one more question. Actually, it's the one in the chat, so I will read it out. From a buyer corporate perspective, are there any good tools to reduce waste of time spent on invoice checks?
Right. So my challenge question to that, why are you checking invoices? If the invoice is produced and it's a good process, there must be, it needn't be checked. But of course, I don't see into the realities of it. So, so my suggestion would be to create a common picture together with the people who are involved with the work, inviting them and creating a picture of what there is, and then thinking about what is the biggest thing we can easily remove, and understanding why are the checks in place, because frequently you get different answers. It's legally required, or you get the answer, we've always done it this way. But when you dig deeper, you always find a way to, eliminate unnecessary checks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you so much for your answers. By the way, let's choose the winner of the giveaway. We have a book which called 20 Things You Need to Know. This book was chosen by Roman. Which of the questions you like the most?
Oh, okay. I'm trying to remember. I really liked the first one.
The first one from Mario. From the ALSP viewpoint, the translator accepting this one, right?
Yes, because it was very
okay,
specific.
great. Mario, so the book is yours. Congrats. Thank you, Roman. Thank you so much. We will have now a short break, but before that, I will launch a poll. Yeah, just to know how did you like the presentation. Thank you, and have a good day. See you.
Thank you so much. See you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.